What's up, friends of the internets, and welcome back to the Jube Tube. I binged all of Stranger Things. But I gave you guys some time, I gave you through Halloween, and now it's November. If you're not done by now, you can't call yourself a fan. That's a fact. We all know it. I know it. You know it. Everyone else knows it. You're a rookie. You've always been a rookie. Go watch the show. So, with that said, I'm not going to give any spoilers away about this, but I am going to talk a little freely. So I'm going to try to avoid any details, but I may say some things that are a little suggestive into some plot points. I will try my hardest to not be like the people that put a freaking image up from like episode 9, the last one, for their preview of their review. So you're showing me something I haven't seen yet, because you watched it all in a day, and now that's ruined for me. Or the articles that literally talk about plot points in them without saying that they're a spoiler. Oh, I hate those people. And I want you to know that I hate you. Moving on. It's going to come as no surprise to you guys that I liked this season. I am a Stranger Things fan. I talked about it last month with the Loot Crate. If you watched that, it was the thing I was most excited for. I love that show. Everything about that show is fantastic. When that first season came out, I actually had to stay home for an entire week. And I just watched it over and over, and I loved it. It was really, really good. So I came to this with very, very high hopes. So, with that being said, I enjoyed it. I had a good time. As a fan, I was pleased, but also as a fan, I was a little disappointed in some areas. So I'm going to be brutally honest about this. But let's talk about the good stuff, then we'll talk about some bad, and we'll finish with some good. Let's get into it. First of all, we get 3 new characters here that play big roles in almost every episode. I'm not going to give names, but there are 3 characters, and they hold weight where they should, when it makes the story interesting. One is a girl that comes in between some of the boys in the group. Some like her, some are attracted to her, and some want her gone. They're in their last year of middle school, so this conflict is timed pretty perfectly. So if a pretty girl walks by, some of them are going to be blind by some of the decisions they made in the past and some of the pacts that they've held with their friends. It creates a good conflict throughout the entirety of the season. Next, her stepbrother, so he plays a good role with her and kind of an antagonist with her, and he also plays an antagonist in the sense of he challenges Steve as like the king of the high school and many other things throughout the entire season. Again, there's a payoff towards the end, so they do a really good job storytelling with those 2 characters. And then also, Will's mom, Joyce, gets a boyfriend. He also tries to act as somewhat of a father figure to Will, which is a big deal because they have a one-on-one talk that changes the whole season from the moment that it happens. All of these characters are seen throughout the entire season. They're sprinkled throughout. They have large impacts where they are, and they have large impacts on the story. How they worked those characters in and how they had them affect the story was done very, very well. The second thing that I really enjoyed is that the Upside Down is now pretty much everywhere. In the first season, it was pretty much just in one place and it might trickle out through some other areas, but now we find out it's pretty much everywhere in the town. It's sprinkling out. There's a big problem. So the Upside Down is just out and about everywhere. That makes for some interesting scenes early on in the series. They find it out very early. It affects everybody by episode 3 and then just takes off for the rest of the season. It's cool to see that the events that happened in season 1 directly affected in a big way things from season 2. Now, I mentioned that they did good with the storytelling. There are characters that you hate in the beginning of the season, but then you feel sorry for them and feel sympathy for them in an episode or 2, and then you start to hate them again. So they create these connections with these characters, and they do a good job at it. Now, it's time for the negative parts, because while I mentioned they did good with the storytelling for me is also where the season suffered. By episode 1, we see that the writers of this are trying to do a very Game of Thrones-esque style of storytelling. By that I mean it splits them up. There are different stories now. Will has his own story, and Dustin has his own story, and then Eleven's got her own story, and then, Nancy's got her own story, and oh, Steve, do I love him? There are so many stories going on. And Game of Thrones, I think, does it very well. In the beginning of this season, they do it very well. But by episode 5 or 6, some of the stories start to become so far out and less interesting than some of the other stories that I begin to lose interest a little bit. Now, I will say, again, I've mentioned Game of Thrones several times. I'm a huge fan of Game of Thrones. So, by saying that, you know that I'm used to episodes that are strictly used basically for storytelling. Nothing big happens, nobody dies, but the plot thickens, right? So I'm used to that. I like that. I appreciate that. That's not what happened here. There were literally entire episodes that I could just toss to the wind. And I wouldn't care about it. Specifically, if you've watched it, you know which one I'm talking about, episode 7. If you haven't watched it, pay close attention to that. I'm actually very interested to see what you guys think, because I have friends who actually enjoyed the things that I didn't like. So this is just me personally not being happy with what they've done. Specifically, without giving too many specifics, 11. 11 is my favorite character. I know she's a fan favorite, and for me, in this season, she's very much like a tertiary or like 4 or 5 tier down character. She's not a main character or really holds any weight in this entire story until episode 9. The last episode, does she really do anything? Episode 8, she's sprinkled in at the end, and episode 9, she does what she does, and that's it. Her story gets very deep. We learn about her past, and then she goes on to do her own thing, and yada yada yada. And by episode 7, the entirety of that episode is strictly focused on 11, but it's done in such a way that I could have skipped it and been totally fine. The weird part about it is her story and the things that happened in episode 7 and the few episodes prior hold a lot of weight for 11 as a character and holds a lot of weight for the story in general. But to me, they were handled poorly. Characters that were introduced in episode 7, there is a big character that's introduced in episode 7 and then dropped at episode 7. It's a huge missed opportunity. Maybe they'll bring that character back in season 3, but to me it was a waste of an episode purely by how the episode was used. Because the story, again, if you were to write it down on paper, you're like, wow, what? But I was bored in that episode, and I just wanted to go on to the next one. Let's move on from 11 and talk about some of the supporting characters. As I mentioned, they added new characters in that held a lot of weight in the story. But there were a lot of characters they also added in that just were there to be there, and they didn't hold any weight. They didn't hold, for me, really any purpose. And the reason that this is a big deal is because I felt like they tried to give them purpose, but there was no connection. As I mentioned with one of the main characters, you hated that character. Then you felt sympathy for that character. Then you hated them again. And then, you know, there was a big payoff and da-da-da-da. So they did it well in some places. They got you invested. They created a relationship, a connection with these characters. And then other ones, they flopped, and they flopped hard, in my opinion. I mean, one of the problems I also have with the series in general is that there's no real sense of danger at any point. I felt that in season 1, and because it was season 1, you got connected to these characters, but they hadn't really set the tone yet. So you didn't know if anybody was going to die. You never knew if Will was going to make it. You didn't know if anyone was going to make it out of the Upside Down. This time around, I never got that sense of, oh my gosh, is this it for Dustin? Is this it for Mike? Is this it for Will? I never got the sense that anybody was going to die. I don't want them to die, but I want the feeling of unease. I want the feeling of the unknown. Could it happen? And to me, I never felt like it could happen. Every episode felt very predictable. My wife actually told me to shut up at one point because every jokingly obvious situation that I would say before it happened in the show actually happened. And I'm talking about every single one of them. I don't know if they foreshadowed too much, or I don't know if they just went with the obvious. But that was lackluster in some points. Throw me for a loop. After all of this, there is a death. And it happens after a heroic moment that is supposed to make you feel connected and just uplifted by this character. And then they die. And it's like, next. I felt no real remorse or sadness for the character passing. And it was towards the end of the season, so you feel like that connection should have been made. So I don't know if it was purely just different focal points for the writers for certain characters, because some of them were new that I felt these connections with, and then some of them were established characters that I lost connections with. So some things were firing, some things were misfiring for me. Also, I will mention, and this is a minor spoiler if you haven't watched any of the trailers, but there are two main villains in here. There's the Shadow Monster and then there's the Demidogs. which is what Dustin calls them. And there's two enemies. One is the size of pretty much a town, and the other one is a demigorgon mixed with a dog. Both of those sound great, but they fell flat for me as well. The one demigorgon, the one enemy from season 1, to me, was a much more well flushed out and just a better handled villain than the hundreds of the dogs and the one massive shadow monster. That was also a sad point for me. They were cool. I enjoyed them when they were on screen, but it was kind of a visual thing. It was never just like a gripping the armrest of your chair as you're watching this because it's so intense with these characters. I never felt that with this at all. I didn't get the horror or suspense elements that I did from the first season there. I felt like what made Stranger Things took a back seat in Stranger Things. That's my biggest gripe here. But it's because I'm a biased season 1 super fan that I feel this way. If I watched the season 2 by itself and I hadn't seen season 1, or I was a mild fan or just, kind of level about it, I'd still enjoy myself. And at the end of the day, let's get back on a positive note. At the end of the day, I still enjoyed my stuff. I'm being very hypercritical about some of these elements, but I hope that they're fixed in season 3 if there is a season 3. I want the good storytelling. I want that stuff to happen again. And I want Eleven to feel like she has weight. I want the villain to really feel like he might destroy or kill or take out a character. Do I want it to happen? No, because I'm invested. I like these characters. But I want to feel like their life is at risk so that I'm even more invested, and my palms are sweating and I'm pumped for the next episode. I want to have that feeling again, and I only got the want to watch that next episode in the very beginning and the very end of this season. And I wish it was handled a little better in some areas. I would still recommend this for everybody. I would still recommend, if you're a fan, watch these episodes. And I'd still recommend this to someone who hasn't seen Stranger Things to start with episode 1, season 1, and watch it all the way through. You're still going to have a good time. If you like this genre, you're going to like it. But just like with any good movie series or anything like that, if you're a fan, you're still going to like it. But because you like it, and you love it and you cherish it, you're going to be more critical than I would be for a movie that I don't care about that much. Like I said though, guys, these are my opinions. I've talked with people that have watched the entire season and they loved every aspect of it. And the things that I pointed out, they're just like, you're not wrong. But I looked past it and I even enjoyed those parts at times. So it's just me. So fill up that comment section below. Let me know what you thought. I'm very curious. I'd love to talk about this stuff with you guys. Also, like always, hit that subscribe button. Share this with your friends. I appreciate you guys. And I'll see y'all again next time.